Hello, and welcome to the RSA Global Africa sessions, one of the stops in the RSA Global Event Series. For those of you unfamiliar with the RSA, the Regional Studies Association is a global and interdisciplinary network for people interested in regions and cities, research, policy, and development. The association supports members with latest research, grant funding, networking, and publishing opportunities, with the aim to support you in growing your research and your careers. We welcome everyone, irrespective of your professional experience and your disciplinary background, and we are proud of being seen to be a friendly, supportive, and inclusive community. The RSA has been going for more than 50 years, and we are a global membership organisation with members in over 80 countries. Now, in 2020, to support the community at what is a very difficult time for all of us, the RSA transformed the events program to online delivery and introduced a number of webinar series to provide knowledge exchange and training. Some of you may have joined these throughout the year so far, but they include a professional development webinar series and a region, cities, and industry webinar series. The RSA has territorial networks with ambassadors in Africa, and all of them have helped in organising the African sessions today. So I'm grateful to Abeer Elshater and Yehya Serag from Egypt, to Lukman Ashodi and Aladeo Ramon Ibrahim from Nigeria, and Ivan Turek from South Africa. RSA Global is a globetrotting online event series organised by and for the RSA community. It runs between the 2nd and 16th of November, and we have already visited Australasia, China, Russia, and Europe. Today, we're stopping over in Africa, a continent where the RSA would like to become even more engaged and active with, as this is the first time an RSA event has been held in Africa. RSA Global is showcasing regional research, development and policy, and gives you the opportunities for knowledge exchange and to engage and interact with researchers across the globe. This event, like the others in the series, is fully funded by the RSA and free and open to all to attend. Recordings of the sessions, incidentally, will be available afterwards in the members' lounge of our website and app. The RSA publishes 5 journals, and amongst these is Area Development and Policy, or ADP as we call it. The journal engages with the transformation of the modern world as a result of development and growth of the global south. As an RSA member, you can view all our journals online, either via the members' lounge or request print copies to be sent to you. Now, of course, in any other circumstance, the RSA would have loved to have been physically present in Africa to run this event and to be able to meet you all in person. Nevertheless, we believe we still have an exciting event which is online for you to enjoy today. Enjoy the sessions and be inspired. Thank you.
Hello, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever your time zone. And my name is Yehya Serag. I am Professor of Urban Regional Planning from Elshater University in Cairo, Egypt, and together with my colleague and friend, Professor Abeer, Professor of Urban Design at Elshater University as well, we will be hosting this session today about the post-conflict reconstruction challenges in North Africa and the Middle East as well. Today we have an interesting discussion. We are co-hosting 3 speakers um, about this hot topic, as we call it. Since 2011, the entire region, the MENA region, as we call it, Middle East and North Africa, has been going through a lot of transformation, political transformation, that started with the Arab Spring revolutions back in 2010, 2011. And in some locations, it's still ongoing. For example, there are some consequences in Syria, in Yemen, in Lebanon, not really in Lebanon, but in Libya, I'm sorry, that we would like to talk about today in the presence or by our esteemed speakers. As such, we will be having three presenters today from Lebanon with Dr. Nabil Menhem, who is going to talk to us about the challenges that they're having now in the reconstruction challenges in Beirut, even in the post-catastrophe period following the Beirut blast last summer. And Dr. Nabil is an internationally experienced regional and metropolitan planner, urban designer, and architect from Beirut. And he actually has developed his career in both professional practices and academic activities. He has been involved in projects of various scales and content, specifically in context post conflicts and natural disasters recovery and reconstruction. He worked in Lebanon, Iraq, and Sri Lanka as well. Um, and I'll also allow, of course, Dr. Nabil, when he starts his presentation, to, if he like, to give a little bit more about himself, if he likes. Then we have from Syria, Dr. Hala Asslan, who actually is going to shed the light more on the challenge that they are facing there in Syria, specifically that Syria, um, um, the conflict is not really over yet, it's still ongoing somehow. But let's see how things will unfold during the presentation. And Dr. Hala Aslan, she has a PhD from École Pratique des Hautes Études, Sorbonne, France. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm not really a French speaker. And she's a consultant for the International Council of Monuments and Historic Sites, ICOMOS, UNESCO, and many other international organizations since 2010. And her passion for the Syrian cultural heritage and her sympathy for the devastation during the crisis was motivated to contribute to its protection and safeguarding through fieldwork, rehabilitation projects, participation in several scientific conferences and workshops at local and regional uh, conferences in several countries, um, including Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Bahrain, Lebanon, and Poland as well. And then, last but not least, we have from Benghazi, Libya, uh, Mr. Ashraf El Hassy, who is actually going to tell us more about the reconstruction challenges opportunities in Libya. And Mr. Ashraf is actually a civil engineer and experienced founder with a demonstrated history of working in the management um, and consulting industry. And he's skilled in engineering, strategic planning, business owners, culture change, and change management, with strong business development as well. He also is highly involved now in several attempts for reconstruction of Benghazi in Libya. Um, Again, before we start with the first presentation, I hope that this session gives more information, gives more insights about the situation, about the challenges that are being faced within the Middle East and North Africa, the challenges that has to do with post-conflict, and in the case maybe of Beirut, would be the post-catastrophe or post-crisis reconstruction challenges. I'm looking forward for this event and for the presentations. And of course, um, before we start, I would really like to thank the Regional Studies Association for their extensive support throughout the years, um, and through this critical time in 2020 for making this event possible. And as the chairman mentioned, uh, it's the first time in Africa, and we really hope that in the future we can have it in physical terms here in Africa. I would like to now ask Dr. Nabil Menhem from Beirut, Lebanon, to
Okay.
join us for this presentation and start the presentation from his side. Dr. Nabil.
Well, thank you, Dr. Serag. And also, I would like to thank the RSA team for giving me the opportunity to be part of this exciting event, global event. My presentation actually will be about our role as planners and dilemmas we face in the Middle East. Okay, done. So actually, I'm Dr. Nabil Menhem. I'm a senior spatial and economic development specialist and also expert in post-disaster recovery and development. I've worked, like Yehya said, Iraq, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, and Erbil also in Iraq. So on post-war, post-disaster reconstruction. I'm also a part of the pedagogic committee of the Planning Institute of Alba in Lebanon. And then my title for this presentation is Planning Conundrum, Rebuilding Cities in a Perpetual Post-Conflict Scenario. So let me go immediately to the context. In some parts of the world, conflicts reach their culmination point and stop, dawning the era of a fresh start. I have witnessed such phenomenon in Sri Lanka and contributed to the post-war recovery and reconstruction efforts, which went relatively fast and well. Yet, in other parts of the world, especially in the Middle East, conflict never ends. They drag and freeze in a perpetual post-conflict status. The examples are many: Lebanon, Palestine, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Sudan, and Yemen, unfortunately. This pushes me as a regional planner that has worked with real enthusiasm in this region for over 25 years, sometimes intervening on same parts of the cities that were destroyed due to act of wars, to raise a series of legitimate questions. What makes our region so doomed when it's one of the richest places on Earth in terms of resources and human capital? How did we settle as citizens or clients of our nations with our political systems after so many colorful revolutions, civil wars, and what have we really achieved? Are we, as planners, part of the solution or sadly agents of destruction? Can we define our acts of resilience and under which planning theory? How can we define our acts of resilience? And under which planning theory, model, or system can we categorize such acts? We, as planners, as I said, in this region are really facing wicked problems. If we consider ourselves to be the knowers, the handmaiden of power, acting as divine fools in trying to bring positive change to our societies, we should be then serving a certain authority, which unfortunately does not rise to the level, neither in terms of promoting long-term visions and stability, nor in terms of provision of public good. If we pretend to reach satisfaction by achieving tiny, small, incremental actions, we soon realize afterwards that such actions, although meaningful in a defined specific moment, usually after a shock, become transient and unsustainable when measured on the long term. If we move to perform advocacy and attempt to assist the voiceless, we still face those same invisible deaf powers that exist just because they are worthy of their names. If we step into radical political planning, we face the risk, as it is happening right now all over the Middle East, of losing our political benchmarks, our social constructs, and our collective memories. Those who used to form and represent our national identities and shared values, and somehow still do. Anarchy cannot be the solution, although tempting. We know it for fact. How can we let go of our political systems that are knowingly the problem and at the same time represent the only hope of short-term stability? This is sadly what people are looking for in this tumultuous region. How can we plan, accumulate, and achieve in a region where time is not a factor? How can we design and build places where space is not a constant, always morphing and always contested? Whom should we plan for when people are constantly on the move, squeezed and pushed away by incessant wave of displaced refugees, trying to hang on to their new miserable places and misery before they are washed themselves by another wave of more miserable people? Should we invent a new definition for resilience, or better, a new term where no state of equilibrium can ever be reached to allow for recovery and reconstruction? And where multiple shocks are to be expected at every corner. I mean those shocks that no one could imagine, like the explosion in Beirut on August 4. Should we invent a new planning model together with new planning tools that could adapt to a constantly unstable status in a region with uncertain futures, with all the circumstances mentioned above? So I would like to welcome you to the planning school of the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, the place where wars never end, where goals are never met, where people move to run from their miserable fates or towards them, where conflict and disaster keep revisiting time and time again, and where planning is nothing but an ethical conundrum. Yet, this is the land where gods performed their first planning acts, where civilizations emerged, where world wonders and cities were first built and rebuilt on top of older cities, where seas were parted and where mountains moved to meet prophets. This is the land of miracles, where nothing is impossible and where hope is fueling human existence. A land where humans are still humans and they show solidarity. It is therefore time to look at the root causes of our miseries and try to address them. Mistrust between governments and citizens is on top of the list. Spatially blind policy approaches leading to centralization and overconcentration of powers in capital cities is also another culprit. These approaches have been already tried since our countries got their independence. Although successful at the beginning, they have left peripheral regions and cities, as well as their inhabitants, grappling with scarcity, neglect, and exclusion, and have helped open the door wide to extremism. It is time for a paradigm shift in development approaches. This shift should go through adopting place-based approaches, leading to a new territorial reorganization, decentralization of powers, and equitable distribution that will give these neglected regions and second-tier cities a role to play in the national construct all over the Middle East, and in revitalizing the economy, which will certainly help pulling residents out of poverty and transform them for once from clients of our political systems to real citizens and contributors to the national construct. And new development approaches that will also help in promoting diversification and building resilience and give back to planners and policymakers their once important role as facilitators and enablers of change. And I want to thank you for your attention, and just to remind you that Lebanon still needs our efforts and solidarity. Since the explosion on August 4, we're still really trying to bring back people to their homes, and I hope even the RSA can look at this issue also and help us to at least to shed light on this catastrophe. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nabil, for this deep presentation, I would say, as well as for all the issues that you raised during that. As we plan to go forward with the next presentation, I'm sure after we've listened to the three presenters. We will have time at the end for the questions and answers so that the whole audience can pose their questions. Thank you very much once more, Dr. Nabil. And now we shall move to Dr. Hala Asslan from Syria that would share with us her presentation on post-war reconstruction strategies in Syrian historical cities. All right, Dr. Hala, we will go to the video. We have a video of the presentation of Dr. Hala Aslan because it seems that there is something with the uh, um, uh, with the bandwidth. Dr. Hala kindly recorded a video of her presentation just in case, and then at the end she will be with us for the questions and answers session.
First of all, I'd like to thank Regional Studies Association Global 2020 Africa panel for having me in this distinguished meeting, and to Dr. Yehya for this lovely presentation. Many thanks for the attendees and all speakers, Dr. Nabil, Dr. Ashraf, and Dr. Abeer, of course, for participating. Regarding my presentation, actually I'll talk about the post-war reconstruction strategies in Syrian historical cities. For better explanation, it must be said that the local administration in Syria has fixed a set of factors for the reconstruction process in historic cities. The most important are reconstruction after the war must address the needs of the population, to those who stayed behind during the armed conflict and to those who came back afterward. It must also support the local population to stabilize their living conditions. Rehabilitation must respect and save the values of the past for the future. The urban context of areas' daily life, markets, khan, alleys, must get the same attention that has been paid of listed monuments. Those urban contexts that were permanent during historic development should have priority to be protected and defined, basic guideline for the reconstruction. Beneath destroyed, damaged, and collapsed buildings and urban symbols still exist basements, ground floor structures, foundation, and technical infrastructure. These remains are very valuable and define an important basis for reconstruction. Also, the tangible parcel of land before the armed conflict must be equally respected with intangible values of the historic district. Historic urban structure, social and economic networks are more relevant for the future than the image of the historic district. Areas with a specific and high archaeological value must be defined to give priority to the first interventions, and which area must be protected intensively. Even reconstruction must be handled like an irrelated development of the existing historic district. Radical transformation into a new urban quality should be viewed with doubt. An organic development cell by cell is much better than instant large-scale intervention. As I have just 10 minutes, I'd like to discuss the status of the old city of Aleppo. The ancient city of Aleppo has been recognized as a World Heritage Site since 1986. Not only have the monument been listed, but also the whole old town for an area of 360 hectares. Since war started in 2011, the old city has extensively been damaged and at all levels, many historic monuments have been damaged and the souk has been burned down. 25% of the historic buildings are damaged, 40% are partially destroyed, and many fragments have been stolen. This destruction was the motivation of UNESCO in 2013 to classify the city as an endangered site on the list of World Heritage Endangered. This presentation will assert the capacity of the Aleppian to rebuild their city for almost ruin. Some neighborhoods are only a landscape of ruin. Houses, hospitals, and schools, infrastructure, and networks, churches, mosques, and minarets, including the ones that belong to the Grand Mosque, Umayyad Mosque, are targeted. Not to mention that the citadel is severely damaged. Everything has been bombed, and explosions from tunnels have destroyed major section of the city. A question arises here: how we can protect, rebuild, and revitalize the old city, focusing on the urban fabric of the old city, of the old town, beyond the monuments, as an integrated part of future global sustainable development should be one of our main objectives in the future. So several rehabilitation projects were announced after the liberation of Aleppo. As you know, the souk is not just a commercial symbol, it's a social place, part of the local culture. And a recovery of this World Heritage Site is a recovery of a community. Having this idea in mind, I was appointed by Aga Khan Trust as a consultant architect for the rehabilitation pilot project in the old city of Aleppo. Souk al-Saqatiya project, in collaboration with General Directorate of Antiquities and Museum in Syria, DGAM. This project was actually nominated for the International Ikram Charija Award for Good Practices in Cultural Heritage Conservation and Management in the Arab region 2020. Souk al-Saqatiya lies in the southwest of the Umayyad Mosque with an axis of 100 meters. The main damage to the market corridor is concentrated in the domes and main gates of the market, and the infrastructure has been damaged, as you see, of course. Western entrance is damaged and needs to be restored. The arc of the entrance is partially destroyed, in addition to part of the wall and part of the vault behind it. Our vision of our study project, the working team wants to make a pioneering study using the latest technologies to prepare an executive model for restoring and rehabilitating the target market. The aim of the study is to preserve the spirit of the old market and give it a touch of technology. preparing the necessary technical studies, architectural, constructive, water, sanitation, electricity, and telephone networks, and the studies related to preserving the heritage and restoring method. In addition to study the isolation, lighting, and the system of providing solar energy for lighting. We had many technical new technique like BIM, building information modeling, to ensure a realistic operational model that avoid any error. What we had done in this project to prepare a comprehensive study of the project management tools in the implementation phase to ensure compliance with the schedule and achieve the quality required in the implementation. Modeling all details in the project, adjust and balanced system of opposed interest has been established for the reconstruction process. Local governance leads the development and decisions that must be taken in a transparent way. International support and expert input had an integrated part of local governance. Another souk, the strategy was to rehabilitate the heart of the old city, the souks. Another souk are now in rehabilitating process, Souk Al Harir with Aga Khan Trust, of course. This is an Khan caravan Sirai and a souk. This is the souk after rehabilitation. Everything is done with Syrian hands. Everything. Another example for the rehabilitation, we have the Grand Mosque of Umayyad, just in face of the citadel of Aleppo. It was severely damaged in 2012 by Daesh. This is the rehabilitation project. The reconstruction is problematic and its subsequent process will pose major potential risks. The condition of the old construction site as well as previous regulation should be evaluated. Proposing could be based on local practices and not only the architectural level. The reconstruction should be a matter of appropriation by the Syrians and essentially based on participation process. Sorry. Finally, we can say that the term reconstruction refers to a process that includes necessary efforts in the transition from war to peace. The main pillars of this process are security, justice, and reconciliation, social and economic issues, governance and participation, cross-cutting tasks. Post-conflict reconstruction includes housing, rehabilitation, and rebuilding. After war, as professionals and cultural heritage specialists, how do we deal with painful personal narratives? How can we show respect and act accordingly? How should we act when reconciliation is not within reach? Finally, thank you, and I'm looking for your questions. Thanks a lot, Dr. Yehya, Dr. Abeer, and all attendees. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hala Asslan. And once more, I apologize because of this connection interruption. But Dr. Hala will be with us in the question and answers part after we listen to our final presenter for this session. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Ashraf El Hassy to join us with his presentation about Benghazi and the challenges and opportunities also for post-conflict reconstruction. Afterwards, I will hand in the question and answers to my colleague, Professor Abeer Elshater, for the rest. Mr. Ashraf, if you can unmute yourself and please share with us your presentation.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to talking to you and meeting you here. Thanks for RSA. Thanks for Dr. Yehya for his invitation. Today, we will talk about reconstruction opportunities, reconstruction challenges and opportunities in Libya. This is an overview about Libya. All of us know the Libya, where it is, and this is the current situation for the conflict. The conflict are starting from the 2011 in the interval of the Arab Spring and still until this minute. So the results of this conflict, when it starts after the international society represented with the Security Council to changing the regime, the conflict start, and it's still until now they are trying for ceasefiring for and starting dialogues in Tunisia. So the destruction was happened with many reasons and with many cases. So we can see here in Darna, the destruction was because of the war against ISIS. So in Benghazi also the destruction was happened because of the same reason. Here in Sirte, in middle of Libya, this city is destructed for 3 times. One, when the regime fallen, the war between the rebels troops and the Gaddafi's troops, and Tripoli, the destructions happened in times of invading LNA to trying to invade Tripoli. Also here in Morzuk, there is destructions and conflict because of Tribians conflict and ethical conflicts between the Arab and the Togo-Tribians. So we have here, we met many challenges because of instability of the country starting from 2011. So the country was ruled with iron hands of the Gaddafi regime. After the regime fallen, so they have fragmentations of the society, and the society was have a very high degree of freedoms, or so this culture of the society here was changed, and no one had to control this rhythm. So the challenges we have that the political conflict are still containing international interfaces in the conflict is fueling the conflict and continuing supplying weapons and international debates. So, and the culture of society, as we say, also the prolonging for the institutional absence of institutional culture, weak performance of the middle management, transitional stages increased, prolonging of these stages, they were not reaching by country to a clear vision to agree the shape of the future state of the country. So also in the corruptions, looting, absence of transparency and accountability, lack of expertise and professionals qualifications to can get the country to stable state, depends on oil and only source of income, alarming weakness of private sectors because the country was participate in the entire economy, complete absence of the role of the banks to supporting financial system. Also, Abeer weakness in research and expert centers, think tanks and non-profit organizations, NGOs, also lack of training, skill development, and stable security situation from 10 years, spread of weapons, many militias, ideological and regional armed groups are there. Also local international smuggling gangs and groups, smuggling of people, that is illegal immigration, drugs, foodstuffs supported by the authorities, and petroleum, and they're subsidized. All the kind of smuggling and gangs are active in Libya. Also the expansion of country, the diversity of cities, lack of population regions, legal immigration across to Europe is about 500,000 immigration per year, keeping them in camps. Some camps are under the government control and some outside control. Lack of control over borders. The borders are opens. Minimal reconciliation efforts because Libyan dissatisfied and they feel they are disengaged in this process. Also the effort of United Nations organization in the country, this is not concentrated in what they are needs actually in the ground. So they are, it's only just media and propaganda bubbles, and they are not any benefit for citizens' lives there. Weak infrastructure in the country also is very big challenges. Absence of any plans to increase in performance, inequality of distribution for resource, role of women also are still not as we should be. Alarming attacks, yes, it's urban plans and land uses, violence in master plans. The problem is not slums, but it is a very high building and very rich building, and also the municipalities and the authorities there isolate the governmental earth are almost there. Also the lack of yes, effective to solve the reviews, the national reviews, who has destroying their houses and their homes. Continues also the destructions also in the heritage building. They are in very hard situations, and they have to secure it before they will not disappear or will fall down because of the destructions in the city was happened in the almost in the city centers where the old and the heritage cities by Ottomani and Italy in these cities are found. So we summarized all these challenges and difficulties, threats with the, we call it advocacy situation. This is a global situation, so reflected to the situation in Libya. So we can summarize as there is a volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity. So this is the main cause for the challenges was there. So after the opportunities, maybe we can pick up or catch it for the Libyan is the strategic and geographical location for the country. Area of the country is about 1.75 million kilometers with a coastal about 2,000 kilometers. Investing in renewable energy should be put into account solar energy, wind energy, electrical, seawater desalination. Also, there is many resources that are not discovered yet. We can extensively continue exploring the oil and gas in the country. The country is a gateway to African countries, landlocked countries, especially. About 300 million people are living in the back of Libya. So the Libyan have 2,000 kilometers on the Mediterranean, and it's corresponding to the Europe directly. So they can also be very big opportunity. Also transit trade from the Mediterranean to Africa, creation of economic, residential and industrial city and new communities. Legal immigration, they can be educated, creating job opportunities for them in sectors, industries. Also legalizing their extension or existence there. Small population for the country is about 7 million people, and all are young, with about 100% of them are under 35 years. So this is possible entirely them changing and shaping their life. The dreamy ambitions, the social and the all Libyan people, their desire to stable, their desire to see their countries in a modern stage. So they ask this improving their conditions, rebuilding manners. Also, the desire of private sector are trying to make a partnership with the governmental or international companies and the NGOs outside to contributing for reconstruction efforts. The ability for starting the assault for stalled projects from 2011. So they have the funds from the sales of oil and gas, so they can at least finance many important projects that are stalled now. Activating storage project is very have many priorities for relaunching them again, so they are making opportunities for opening
Mr. Ashraf, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to conclude like in less than a minute because we're running out of time. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. So we changed from the focus situation. We summarized the challenge as focus stability that should be with we have a vision, we have the understanding the situation there, where are things going on, understanding globally and act locally. Also clarity, the situation, what their needs, what we can sustain, what we can start, what we can doing as an urgent. Also agility, how about leadership and management. So we can conclude them with 6 is essential for reconstruction effort. Immediate action about long run vision, objectives, also stakeholders and shareholders, how to engage them. Also future requirement and safe secures for these projects. Strength, systematic governance, transparency, accountability, sustainability means to smart from start to sustain means stability. Solidarity also internally and externally, and putting in our account CSR as corporate social responsibility. This is we can summarize what we can starting a real benefitable reconstruction of peace. Thank you very much.
And briefly, I would like to thank our panelists for their wonderful presentation. I would like to thank Dr. Nabil, Dr. Hala, Mr. Ashraf for wonderful topics they discussed and show us today. And now we can come up to our session, a final session related to if the audience have questions to our panelists. So please write down your questions and who you wish to answer these questions. Okay, we have questions for Dr. Nabil. If you can you hear me well? We have questions related to the approach you conclude at the end related to a place-based approach. Can you please explain what are this approach consist of and what are the pillars of this approach?
Thank you, Abeer. And actually, those place-based approach actually are policy approaches that look at the real capacity of every city, whether first-tier city, second-tier city, and the assets of those cities in terms of human capital, economic assets, and resources. Actually, what was happening till now in our region is that the governments chose to follow a different approach, which is spatially blind, and actually which is promoted by the World Bank, and which works actually when you don't have enough resources to spread all over the territory. But they've been applying it for over 60, 70 years since we got our independence as different nations in this region. And then this led for people to really move towards those capital cities and to neglect the regions, the remote regions. And then it's time now to look back and see maybe we can look in a different way and try to focus our investments in those cities. So at least to curb this wave of displacement of people wanting to go to the capital and over-concentrating over there and keeping the poor there. Even we build hospitals and schools, and we build roads and bridges to link to the capital city. It can work till a certain moment, and then it has a threshold, and then we need to analyze this threshold and really try to distribute more wealth to those regions in order to support them so they can be part of this national built-up, actually, national construct.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Nabil, for elaborating these questions. And now I have another questions to Mr. Ashraf. Can you please unmute your phone? And this question is related to a future outlook for Africa, as you displayed that a map connecting different nations and countries together. Do you think from your perspective that one day we can have this outlook for African cities or African nations together?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Abeer. Actually, this is not a modern or new projects. The Africans are really thinking about how to connecting the Mediterranean with the center of Africa with the path or trajectories is more profitable and more easier and more cheaper than, especially for the landlocked countries. And in Libya before 2011, there were many research and studies starting for this, to connecting the coastal cities with the railroads, with roads and highways to reaching the centers of Africa. Also, the Chad, the government of Chad and many governments in the Africa, they are trying to doing something to make it an international projects for this special areas, to make new settlements there, new communities in these roads, So the efforts are still ongoing for this.
Okay, great. And we also have another questions, but I'm afraid we are running out of time. But I can raise these questions, and I will be more than happy if our panelists can provide an answer by typing on the Q or comments box. So we have a questions related to the effect of COVID-19 on MENA region, and we much appreciate if Dr. Nabil answered these questions. And also we have a questions related to what happened in Syria. So please, Dr. Hala, if you can handle these questions about the role of tourism in the case of a war, or what should be done as a reconstruction system or strategy in Syria, especially with a reference to historical cities. So I would much appreciate if our panelists answer these questions in the comment box or leave it as a message, a private message to me. In this, I would like to thank you all for your attendance, and also for our panelists, for RSA, for giving us opportunity to open this discussion between us in the Middle East and in Africa. Thank you again, and have a good evening, day, or a morning. Thank you again.
I'm Immaculate Anwokoro, Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Lagos, Nigeria, and the chairman of this panel titled Regional Planning, Integration, and Security in Nigeria. Before I go ahead, I would like to establish some housekeeping rules and general information so that we're all on the same page. This webinar will be recorded and will be made available for all RSA members on the RSA Members Lounge. For questions, please use the question and answer function. You can also upvote questions by giving them a thumbs up. Now, for our speakers, we all know that you have just 5 minutes to speak. You'll be notified a minute to the end of your presentation so you can round up. I'll quickly hand over to Town Planner Yehya to give his opening remarks. But before then, I would like to introduce him very properly. Town Planner Yehya is the chairman, TAYAY Limited, a firm of consulting town planners based in Lagos. He had served the Lagos State government as Honorable Commissioner, Physical Planning and Urban Development between 2011 and 2015. And presently, he's the National President of the Nigerian Institute of Town Planners, NITP. He has over 35 years of professional practice experience across public, private, and academic sectors of the profession of urban and regional planning. Mr. Yehya, you have the floor. Please give us the opening remarks.
Thank you, moderator. I must express the appreciation for this maiden collaboration of the Regional Studies Association, LASPOTEC, with Nigerian Institute of Town Planners. Let me acknowledge the role played by Lukman Oshodi, who graciously brought us into this, and also appreciate the coordinating efforts of Katharina, who has tried to ensure a hitch-free program and linking all of the speakers. Let me appreciate those who have dedicated their time to be here on this program. Security, no doubt, has become a very serious challenge in Nigeria, and this has been so for over a decade, negatively affecting national integration as well as regional planning. We know how our internally displaced persons are increasing by the day. So I'm hoping that this program will afford us some takeaways that will provide a relief to the entire nation going forward. I wish to welcome you all, the participants, the panelists, especially the international resource person, and I hope that we will have a fruitful deliberation. On behalf of NITP, I thank you very much for this program. Thank you.
Very well said. Indeed, we are looking forward to various views on security in Nigeria. And I know we have 5 great speakers for today, starting with Professor Timothy Guse. Professor Timothy, you're going to be speaking now. Professor Guse is a graduate of Nigerian and Canadian universities. Professor Guse holds 4 academic degrees, including Master of Environmental Design with concentration in urban design and PhD in environmental planning with specialization in housing. He has worked and taught at university levels in Canada, United States of America, and Nigeria. He has researched and published extensively in the areas of housing, urban security. He is a registered town planner and fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Town Planners. He is currently on staff of Nasarawa State University as Professor of Urban Design and Planning in the Faculty of Environmental Sciences. Professor Guse, you have the floor. 5 minutes. I'm going to intimate you a minute to the end of your 5 minutes. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Immaculata. I think one of the challenges we are facing with our situation is that of incorrect diagnosis. Like it was mentioned in the flyer, many people tend to see the problems, especially in North Central Nigeria, as an intertribal crisis. Now, this is very erroneous. In fact, those of us who live in the area consider it a little bit insulting and demeaning, because the most, if not all the problems we're experiencing in North Central Nigeria are related to 2 critical factors. First of all, the desire to control resources, and secondly, the desire to have access and control of power, usually political power, both at the local and the national level. And the conflicts are many and varied. The more noticeable ones are the Boko Haram insurgency, but for those of us in the central part of the country, is the herder and farmer clashes. And these problems have led to major regional changes or balances in the regional balance. First of all, one of the critical things we've noticed is that has moved populations from rural areas to urban areas or along the major arterials, which are considered safer by the people. The result of this is that it has led to diminished agricultural production, and therefore it has threatened food security in the area. Not only that, it has also truncated regional integration initiatives. People are no longer free to move. The former trade routes, the former marketing arrangements, former exchange of ideas, people, goods, is no longer happening as before. And because of the migration to the urban areas, it has led to strained urban services. In fact, urban situations, they can simply not cope with the deluge of people and with the challenge they are facing. So what do we do? But I want to spend a bit more time on this in the short time that I have. First of all, is to indicate that there is no magic bullet. There's no short-term cure. Right now in our country, the emphasis has been on putting more boots on the ground, that is more security personnel. But I consider this a palliative because it does not address the real underlying socioeconomic roots of insecurity. Even so, most of what we are doing has been centralized. And as anybody will know, centralized organizations in a highly diverse polity like Nigeria leads to a lot of inefficiencies, leads to a lot, sometimes even the command chain is too long for effective decision to be making. So by the time the decisions are made, it's almost like providing medicine after death. So we need to have more localized approaches, even in the security, even if we're going to use more boots on the ground. People who know the environment, people who are connected to the region, and people who are able to understand what is happening and be able to provide appropriate cures. The second issue is that we need to begin to think about appropriate alternative models of socioeconomic activities. I think the one that is most obvious is that the herder-farmer clashes have been going on I mean, for the last decade, because there are more farmers and there are more animals. And because of this, there's greater interplay between the two. And because of that interplay, there is more conflicts. There's no time to expand it, but just to mention that in my younger days, cattle were able to move, and we didn't have this kind of crisis. Today we have it. So why don't we have more controlled grazing? And in one of the states, they are calling it ranching, as opposed to uncontrolled open grazing. Then there's a question of reorganizing settlements, transportation and production on a regional scale. We tend to look at things as individual activities. But when you look at a regional scale, you find that even security can be handled by having more self-supporting, integrated, protected villages and towns. And of course, since insecurity has regional dimensions, we need to include regional perspective in everything we're doing. We just finished a program of study to show the integration of the region or the Benue Valley. And I think we need more such initiatives to be able to move the problem forward. Thank you very much. I'm sorry there's no time to expand.
I'm so sorry. The time is indeed very short, but I'm sure we'll be able to get one or two things that you have said. So running through, because we don't really have time, we'll move over to the second speaker, Taibat Lansing. Taibat Lansing is an associate professor of urban planning at the University of Lagos, Nigeria, where she leads the Perpetual Development Research Cluster and serves as co-director at the Center for Housing and Sustainable Development. Her research focuses on the interface of social complexities, urban realities, and the quest for environmental justice. She's particularly interested in how formal and informal urban systems synthesize in emerging African contexts. Dr. Lansing.
That's fine. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts. This afternoon, I just want to share briefly about something that we're not paying a lot of attention to in Nigeria, and that is the youth bulge. 42% of Nigerian citizens are aged below 14, and we currently have a 14% youth unemployment ratio. Professor Gyusi had spoken about the farmer headsmen clashes and some of the issues we have in Nigeria's northeast, the Boko Haram insurgency. All that is being propelled by young people. Most of the terrorists, the militants across the country are young people. And oftentimes when these skirmishes happen, people escape, people leave where they are and they move into the cities. Unfortunately, in the cities, we are not prepared to host them. And that's why we have rising cases of homelessness, of urban discontent, of urban violence. And then there's a proliferation of survivalist jobs, such as motorbike riding, load carrying, very menial jobs. And this happens all over the city. So there's a lot of urbanization, but it is indeed the urbanization of poverty. And it comes with gross challenges for the city because the city is growing often unregulated. And then there are also town planning challenges of organizing and also providing for this cohort. So what do we need to do? Essentially, planners need to look beyond the brick and mortar and start understanding the social dynamics of those they are planning for. We need to incorporate a lot of proper planning into our regimes. Over 60% of the Nigerian population earns less than $2 a day, and that is our reality. There is no use planning for these white elephants or aspirational projects when most of our people are, in near destitution. So we have to be realistic about providing this bottom-up grounded planning, understanding that informality is our way of life, and informality needs to be integrated into the urban system. There's also a need for redistribution of resources. Look loop back planning that I call it. Essentially, that is recognizing the agency in the communities and allowing communities to take the lead even in urban renewal, in situ upgrading, and providing, these micro scale type of planning. Planning needs to be more participatory, and more importantly, it needs to be realistic. Most of the development control measures that we have essentially work towards an orderly society, but a society that has over 60% of our population living below the poverty line is not an orderly society. And so we must take this into consideration as we plan, so that the plans will not get distorted. And finally, there is a need to be direct about integrating economic opportunities into planning. Planning is way beyond the physical development. There needs to be a consideration of the social dynamics and the economic realities. And I think this is the bedrock of instituting safe, sustainable, resilient, and sustainable urban development, as the SDGs have challenged us to do. Thank you.
Oladayo Ibrahim is an academic with thematic research interests in rural and regional planning, tourism development, urban development, and infrastructural development. He has written scholarly articles in his areas of academic interest in scholarly journals, both locally and internationally. He authored a book titled Tourism Planning and Development in Badagry. Introduction to Rural Development Planning are almost completed. He is a fellow member and country representative of Regional Studies Association in Nigeria. He's also a member of the following learned associations: the Regional Science Association International, Association of American Geographers, Fellow of Institute of Chartered Geographers of Nigeria, and Nigerian Institute of Town Planners. Mr. Ibrahim, please, you have the floor. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Prof. Good afternoon. At independence in 1960, about 85% of the population are in rural areas, while 15% are in urban areas. Agriculture was the mainstay of the economy. Rural people in the rural areas are farmers, and the farming activities and product revenue from it are the mainstay of the economy. The exigency of this, initially, we started as 3 regions, 4 regions, and the exigency of the Civil War in 1967, 1970 led to creation of 12 states, later on 19, and presently we have 36, the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Discovery of oil made Nigeria to become today as mono-economic country. Because of the oil revenue, rural areas that is housing about 85% of the people then was neglected. Oil money came to Nigeria. The wealth from the oil made us forget about agriculture. And so our leaders at independence, because of the oil money, decided that economic activity is best planned by the economists. And so economic planning was given the pride of place. And economic planning that we know is about growth, not about development. It's about growth. It's not interested in the consequence of growth. And so the rural area, all the policies that were embarked upon about education, about health, about industry, all these policies are those that actually encourage rural urban migration. And so people abandon farming. Oil money has come. Our mainstay, agriculture, is forgotten. So, and the policy is that one that gave precedence to urban development. So, our people in rural area abandon rural area and move in droves to urban areas, with their consequences, of course. Coming to urban area without any visible skill, the only skill they know they have is that of farming. And since the economic policy are those that are such that discourage farming, people abandon farming and move to urban areas. In the urban area, there are no job for them, and so they constitute problem for urban area. Infrastructure that are provided in urban area, they put pressure on it because of the mass population of people that are moving to urban area, put pressure on it. So urban infrastructure were not working, and in rural area, infrastructure were not provided.
Mr. Ibrahim, you have 1 minute more.
This rural-urban migration, the policy that encouraged rural-urban migration, and the consequences of such for rural area, for urban area, left so many Nigeria unemployed, just like Dr. Lawrence said. Youth, even adults, are unemployed, and so they are willing hand for quite a lot of activities that are not so noble. And so what can we do is to give a pride of place to regional planning, the one that will look at urban area in conjunction with the rural area, the one that will take the urban area and the rural area, so that as we develop, large percentage of our resources are spent in urban area, where today, of course, we have about 50% of the people, but still today we still have about 50% of our people in rural area that are neglected, no infrastructure, no development. So we have crammed our people into urban center. The larger rural area that are there are not occupied. So it's in urban area, you have all manners of criminal activity.
Round up, please.
People must have a living. So what our recommendation is that it is crystal clear for any meaningful development to be realized and be sustainable in the country as large and as diversified as Nigeria. Regional planning should be an integral part and complementary to economic planning in national development planning. In doing this, the plan of action must be developed by stakeholders themselves according to prevailing regional context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Valerie Lingua. So Valerie Lingua is Associate Professor on Urban and Regional Planning at the Department of Architecture of the University of Florence, where she acts as Scientific Director of the Regional Design Lab. She is RSA Ambassador for Italy and Coordinator of the ESOP Thematic Group on Regional Design, and has been an affiliate academic in prestigious universities and research groups. Ballet School of Planning, UCL in 2014, Delft University of Technology 2016, Paris, Sorbonne University 2018. She's a well-recognized academic on regional planning and design, governance, rescaling, and visioning. She conducts research activities and consultancies at EU national and regional level concerning strategic spatial planning, sub-regional and inter-municipal planning, definition of river agreements. Let's share your views on today's topic.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Of course, I don't know the situation in Nigeria. I look for the situation and was very interested by previous presentation. I was challenged by the search for mechanism for integrating the emerging security architecture into the states and federal structures. So my presentation will start from the concept of interactive governance, of interaction that is at the base of collaborative planning, and will deal with this concept in the frame of regional planning. So interaction, of course, is the common action for achieving common objectives by sharing ideas, rules, and resources. And we will refer to the modes of governance and to the governance order proposed by Koyman to define 3 modes of interactive governance that are related to the government, the hierarchical governance that is expression of the state, the co-governance activity that born from cooperation activities like the ones in the Amotekun operation that involve local hunters, vigilantes, Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corp, and also Odua People's Congress. So a series of institutions and associations that try to cooperate together. And then we also have self-governance that are self-organized group that try to cooperate to achieve some goal in the best, in the better of in the worst, because of course in the realm of self-governance we can consider also tribal or insurgent groups. And we also refer to the institutionalization of these cooperative governance actions. And this can come in different forms, memorandum of understanding, private-public partnership, but also manifestos. And of course, the intent of each of these cooperative activity is to influence the hierarchical governance, and so the state action. But at the same time, the state is interested in governing this governance network. And this is the field of meta-governance. So in this field, the government can act in a handoff attitude. So staying at a distance and trying to also activate, stimulate, and giving the condition for networking, but also can govern, can act in an hand-on attitude. So in interaction with the networks and collaborating with them. We have a focus on images because I'm a special planner. We work on regional design to provide a better image of the region, working on spatial imaginaries and the ideas of future spatial organization, because all of this group, of course, have a spatial imaginary and an idea of this space. Of course, this idea can be conflictual because it cannot converge. So the role of spatial planning can be the one of making these ideas emerge, even in different planning systems. This is an overview of the different planning systems.
Well, I have one more minute.
Yeah. I wanted to refer to the case of Italy, just to make an example. We have a tradition of regional planning, but we also are engaged in metropolitan planning. In the city of Florence, the spatial imaginary is, is connected with the Renaissance, but is also conflictual because we have a different group, different identitarian group, and we build up the metropolitan spatial plan, trying to putting together all these regional identities from the Chianti Shire to the metropolitan one. So this was the final vision of the metropolitan city. what was the conclusion? How can we integrate this security architecture into the state's federal structures in Nigeria? The need is the one for rebuilding governance structures, also formalizing these soft spaces that arise, and working on regional planning instruments. And regional planning can work on the enhancement of spatial imaginaries, also trying to avoid rhetoric as smart, sustainable, resilient, but branding this regional competitiveness, taking into account these local identities. So thank you so much. The contents of this presentation are the contents of this book, so you can find it and go deeper in these arguments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valeria. Well, we can actually interact. I want to start with Professor Gise. I was interested, in knowing really, you talked about insecurity and the different regional dimensions, which we know exist in different regions of the country. And you're talking about the solutions that, since this security has regional dimensions, you also think that the solution should include regional perspectives. Can you throw more light on this, please?
Thank you very much, Immaculata. Let's think of just one. And this was touched on also by Oladayo on talking about it.
Yeah.
One of the regional things that's happening is that people are migrating. Okay, so when you have migration, you also have push and pull factor. And therefore, you have to understand what is driving people away from those places. Is it just insecurity or is it more than that? They think of the area of transportation. Now, one of the things we discovered is that the colonial administration had transportation networks that connected the coast to the north. But within the region, transportation has been very weakly developed. For example, in the Benue Valley, the Benue River is the most navigable river in the whole of Nigeria, but it's hardly used. It can be navigated. You can go by riverboat all the way from Lokoja at the confluence to Yola, almost on the Cameroon border. But very little takes place in this, along this axis. So is it not time we began to think of go beyond a railway line from Port Harcourt to the far north to think about how you go to connect the farmer in Kogi State with the cattle person in Adamawa State and all the other people in between. This is just one dimension of it. And also, I think that's just one dimension. Let me just stop at that point to be able to give other people a chance to interact.
Okay. Dr. Lawrenson was also interested in the informality aspect of your presentation. But how do you really incorporate planning into informal settings without losing the core essence that stresses African resilience?
I think the first thing is to recognize that planning is not only what the colonialists gave us. Planning is essentially the ordering of land uses or making a community habitable and livable for the residents. So it must be contextual, and you must recognize how the people who are in those communities are living their lives and find a way just to incorporate measures of habitability, livability, into the community. So informality is not anti-planning. It just behoves on us as planners to be more creative and find a way to organize, how people live their lives in a way that is functional and a way that is not environmentally injurious. And the most important part of planning with informality is planning with the people. People are ordering or reordering the city according to their needs and aspirations. And it's the planner's work to go in there, work with them to make it a more habitable existence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ibrahim, I would like to ask a simple question. Considering the rate of urbanization in Africa, the rural areas may eventually go into extinction. how do we integrate planning to prevent this, as rural areas play, a critical roles in the sustenance of these cities?
Rural area will not go into extinction. It is not even in our interest that the rural area goes into extinction, because we can't make the space. We can't make the space in Nigeria. We can't make all of them as towns and cities. Rural area will have to continue to survive. But then the policy, regional policy, has to be recognized. Over the years, we have our decision in this country, our planning decision has been based on economic reasons, economic views, and little is actually given to decision, regional, rural planning. Most of them are in rhetoric. They are not. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Rural development, regional planning, most of the time they are just mere rhetoric by our leaders, by our those in government. Regional planning, rural planning are not actually on the ground. People, let us make use of the space. Let us make use of the rural area. Let us find a way to encourage people to go back to some of these spaces, occupy these spaces, and help develop those resources. There are resources all over the place in Nigeria, but because all rural areas, regional areas are abandoned, all of us want to cram ourselves into only urban area. What are we going to do with the resources in those places? And of course, oil will not last forever. At a point, we just have to go back to agriculture, tourism, and other resources, develop them and make resources of it. And those ways we can engage our teeming unemployed and underemployed people in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ibrahim. Valerie, I listened to your presentation and it was quite, even though we didn't have enough time to go through all the slides, but I'm wondering, what did you really find as a point of convergence between the security governance structure in your place and Nigeria, and which areas specifically do you think Nigeria can benefit most from what you already have?
Yes. Thank you for this question, Immaculata. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So what you can take profit on is to work on the network that have been built up for this security operation, and to work on this network as activators of local identities and as the way to put together and stimulate other networks in collaboration. So this is not a matter, I was very interested by Professor Hughes that said, of course, improving the number of persons that were involved in securities is a palliative, and this is true. This is obvious. So the way is to work on this security network and to use it as a kickoff network for improving other policies and for improving this cooperation among these different states and regions that are now engaged in a common policy. So I followed the process, and it seems that at the beginning the state denied this operation and said that it was not legal in front of the constitution. But then also the state was able to work on it. And so when he understood that it was in a frame of meta-governance in which he can meta-govern these networks, he accepted to collaborate. So this is a way to work together that has to be improved, also not only for security, but also for regional planning and interregional state planning, okay?
So I don't know if any of the panelists has any question.
Yes, I do have a comment.
Okay.
I think we should not look at migration from rural areas to urban areas as a dead loss. Because as more people move out of the rural areas to urban areas, it creates opportunity for a new form of rural development, modernization in agriculture, transformation of the landscape from mere subsistence farming, for example, to more commercial farming. So I think we should be looking for opportunities rather than just as if we're not trying to recreate the past. We should be looking at trying to create a future which will be more productive, I think. That's just a comment I wanted to make.
Thank you. Let me introduce him briefly. Olumide Olushola Metilelu is the acting rector of the Lagos State Polytechnic, Nigeria. He holds several academic degrees, including MSc in International Hospitality and Tourism from Bournemouth University, UK, MSc in Public Administration, Postgraduate Diploma in Transport Studies, BSc in Economics from Ambrose Ali University, Ecuador. He has worked at the Lagos State Polytechnic since 2001 and has contributed several research papers to reputable publications. Metilelu has also served as reviewer to international journals, as well as external moderator and assessor to various departments. Kindly give us your closing remarks for this session.
Thank you very much, moderator. Like I said earlier, we expected 6 people to make presentation, and 5 people have made their presentation, and the presentations are excellent presentations. And this is a very good initiative, particularly at a time like this, when security situation is a major challenge in Nigeria. And looking at it within the context of regional planning, it is essential that from the submission and discussion that we have had today, there is a need for us as a nation to do a need assessment of our various issues, particularly the challenges that are facing the Nigerian state. And it has also been discussed here extensively that the issue of urban migration is critical, and that overstretching existing facilities is also very critical. There's a need for us to look at the issue of the youth bulge. Unemployment issue is there, poverty issue is there, and of course, it is important that all of these are considered in order to ensure that we have an effective regional planning, particularly for the issue of security. So, in conclusion, I will also want to say that it's essential for our country as a nation to have a responsible government that will look at all of these issues so that we can create the needed employment for our people, so as to be able to stem the issue of security. We also must ensure that we provide social amenities for our people. It is important that we empower people so that this will reduce the level of poverty, this will reduce the level of unemployment, and of course, we also must ensure that the kind of planning that we're doing must be such that it's integrated for the benefit and for the good of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Acting Director. Even though we have made our closing remarks, I think we still have like 3 minutes because we just got a very interesting question. Professor Lisa, can I direct this question to you? It's quite interesting, and I think you will do justice to it. Somebody is asking that with the end of the EndSTART protest that was just concluded in Nigeria, where do we see security in Nigeria in the next 5 years? Because we know the kind of problems, the kind of challenges we had with this protest.
I watched the EndSARS protest on the television. I tried to listen. My problem with the EndSARS protest was not that we don't have issues with the existing police process, but I seem as if the protesters were not sure of what they really wanted. It just kept expanding. Definitely what he said, that it's almost as if we need to go back to our pre-1963 to 1969 security architecture. At that time, we had a native authority police, we had a regional police force, we had a state police, a federal police force. All of them had their jurisdictions. Each one of them was operating and they were very effective. In fact, they were not armed. Armed police is a very recent introduction to the Nigerian polity. So, and I think Dr. Lawanse also mentioned on this, we have a lot of youth who are unemployed. The youth budge, which we do as if it doesn't exist. It does exist, and frustrated people are going to end up with doing frustrating things and being destructive. We're not engaging them. People graduate from universities with no jobs. Factories are closing down. So I think there are so many things we need to look at. All of these have regional dimensions, because if we don't think of it in Nigeria as a regional system, you may end up concentrating everything maybe in Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Ibadan, and everybody will move there. We end up with huge metropolitan areas with a lot of problems, and with the rest of the country not being adequately taken care of. People do not move aimlessly. They move because they want to. So I think for me in the future, it's not a problem. The problem is the present. We're not engaging. We're not using the opportunities. We have to be able to turn around the clock.
We still have 5 minutes. One last question. Mr. Ibrahim, I'll direct this to you. And Dr. Lawanse, you can also share your views on this question. Do you have any policy recommendation for the future of regional planning?
I like we have said again and again, we are over concentrating all activity on urban areas.
Just in one minute, please.
I think that our policy decision should be influenced more by the spatial nature of this country. We should think of more of region and rural area, and of course not less of urban area, of course. But then let our decision maker think in concrete terms about region and rural area, and not over concentrating all activity in urban area.
Dr. Lawanse, do you have any thoughts to share on this?
Yes, I'd just like to chip in that entities like the Lagos Mega City Development Commission that started the good work in the 2000s, but was not allowed to implement, should be encouraged, looking beyond, the city scale and incorporating the peri-urban interface, and also looking, across integrating or collaborating across different metropolises. I think that can work. And another thing also is to identify the comparative advantage economically and build from the ground up, like I said. Different regions in Nigeria, for example, have different types of economic advantages that can be leveraged, and pushed, for greater national development. I think strong regions and a weaker center will do us a lot of good. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Olumide Metla, do you want to say something?
Yes.
Mr. Ibrahim, half a minute, please.
Yes, we thank RSA for this opportunity. Going through all other RSA global events, we realize that in Nigeria we have more speakers than other places. We hope next time when this kind of thing comes up, we are going to have few speakers so that speakers can develop whatever they want to see and
have more time. Yes. I agree with you.
The NITP, LASPOTEC are the chief hosts for this program. We hope henceforth the two NITP, LASPOTEC to collaborate and bring RSA properly to Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank all our speakers, for their great thoughts today. I also want to thank all the other attendees for joining us in today's session. I know we are all on the same page that Nigeria really has a lot of challenges, security challenges in various regions, and we're all striving very hard to achieve or meet the Sustainable Development Goal 11 of making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Thank you, everybody, for Thank you.
Prof.
Bye.
Thank you very much to our speakers and Immaculata for chairing the session. We have a very short break before we continue with our plenary, Urbanization, Economic Density and Pandemic. That's just going to start in less than 5 minutes. So time to get a coffee, and we'll be back soon. Thank you again for your inputs.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Regional Studies Association webinar. I'm Verna Nell from the University of the Free State, and I'll be chairing this session this afternoon. We have with us today Professor Ivan Giroc, and I'll introduce him shortly. Just a reminder to ensure that all your microphones are muted, and that this webinar will be recorded and available for all Regional Studies Association members on the Members Lounge. Please, if you have questions, use the questions and answer function. You can also upvote questions by giving them a thumbs up. You'll see the information at the bottom of the screen. Once Prof. Giroc has spoken, then we'll have a question and answer session. Based on the questions in the box, we'll ask Prof. Ivan to answer them. But now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Prof. Ivan Giroc holds the National Research Foundation Chair in City Region Economics at the Department of Economics and Finance and the Center for Development Support at the University of the Free State. He's authored more than 150 peer-reviewed publications and 11 books or monographs. He's former editor-in-chief of Regional Studies, executive director of the Human Sciences Research Council, and chairman of the Durban City Planning Commission. He was formerly professor of urban economic development at the University of Glasgow. He is an occasional advisor to the United Nations, the OECD, the African Development Bank, UNECA, and several national governments, including South Africa. His recent books include Transitions in Regional Economic Development, 2018 Routledge, Value Chains in Sub-Saharan Africa, 2019 Springer, and Restoring the Core, the Central City Decline and Transformation in the South. And that was published this year through Elshater. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Reading. Prof. Ivan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Verna. And it's a great pleasure to be with you. I understand my video is not working, but can you at least hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
That's great. So thanks to the Regional Studies Association for organizing this event. It's very exciting to be part of it, and I've enjoyed it very much this afternoon, hearing from the Middle East and from Nigeria. I want to talk to you about, let me get my screen shared, about urbanization and issues of density and the pandemic. I hope you can now see my slides. So urbanization, we've already heard, is a major issue for Africa. It's the fastest fastest growing cities in the world are in Africa. We also have major issues around the pandemic and around poverty. So let me move on to my first slide. The figures for the pace of urbanization and urban growth, urban population growth, are quite striking. The urban population of Africa is going to double in the next 15 years and treble over the next 30 years. Nigeria, it's great we've had Nigeria in this conversation because Nigeria faces particular challenges. It will soon become the third most populous country in the world, and its cities, partly as a result of that, face particular challenges of rapid population growth. Now, across much of Africa, with perhaps with the exception of some North African countries, urbanization is happening in a context of low average incomes, people are generally poor, and limited state capacity. So when we come to talk about planning, and I am going to be talking about planning, I think we have to think very, very hard about the systems we have and the procedures that planners follow, because capabilities are constrained, which means realistic planning. I like that phrase that Tybert Lowitson used. Planners have to be very realistic in this context. A key fundamental point I want to make that drives a lot of my remarks is that density, this urbanization, is potentially a very important and powerful force for good. It can help Africa to transform conditions of the economy and of society. So we have to embrace urbanization and not try to resist it. That's a really important message. It applies across the continent. It's too often that we try to resist and back off away from this process as if we could stop it, in the hope that this will reduce some of the challenges of managing urbanization in our big cities. It's partly a question of diagnosis. Again, an earlier speaker talked about the need to get the diagnosis correct. If we diagnose the symptom, which is crowded settlements, as the problem, we don't probe beneath that symptom, then we are going to come up with the wrong solution, which is basically to try and stop urbanization. The issues are more fundamental than that and need to be addressed more fundamentally. Now, what's really important about the current point in time is that the pandemic has really highlighted the key challenges we face in a very, very visible way. And I want to show that with some evidence from South Africa. It's injected a new urgency into the situation here. Already urbanization is a massive issue, but it's really important that we respond in an appropriate way to this new situation, that we seize the moment. And as academics and researchers, that we come forward with constructive responses to this, not kind of knee-jerk responses, which we've often seen in the public domain in the last few months. So density does have this downside, and we've seen some governments responding negatively to that. It does pose risks to public health, and we see that with the spread of the pandemic very clearly. It spreads. The mechanism of transmission is human interaction, human contact, and therefore the kind of knee-jerk reaction is to say, let's spread people out, let's de-densify our informal settlements in order to create more space between people. But I'm suggesting this isn't the appropriate response. The pandemic has also increased hardship and hunger, and I want to show some evidence of that, indicating that we need not just a physical response to the disease and the pandemic, but and our public health response. We need an economic response. We need an economic agenda for our cities. And the response has been weak and poor in various ways, which means we need to strengthen capability. We've got to use the moment to try and strengthen the capabilities for realistic planning. That's the key message. To de-risk density is a key sort of bottom line in my talk. To de-risk density for all the negative aspects of it by building better, building back better. It's partly a physical agenda, but it's also an economic agenda. So urban growth, there are two forms of urban growth, essentially. There's an extensive and an intensive form of growth. Africa's urban footprint, another very striking statistic that comes out of the work of Solly Angel in the US, is that the footprint of urban areas in Africa is going to increase between 4 and 5 times over the next 30 years. That's an astonishing expansion of already existing large urban areas. And it's, as you can see, it's about 1.5 times the rate of population growth. Much of that growth is on the periphery of cities. It takes an extensive form. It's the expansion in the footprint, with all the implications for agricultural land, for biodiversity and ecosystem services, watercourses, farmland, all the significant consequences of that. So it's really important that we plan this carefully and better, in fact. Urban growth in South Africa is much slower than many other African countries. It's less than half the average rate of growth elsewhere. So we find actually a combination of extensive and intensive growth, inwards growth within the built-up area, within the existing footprint. And the two maps on the slide show on the left the growth of informal settlements in red. This is Gauteng, it's the economic heartland of the country. And it shows that the dark red areas are where much of the growth of informal settlements has been in the last 15 years or so. And it's largely on the periphery of the city. The blue is the growth of backyard informal housing. This is, and I'll explain that more fully later on, but you can see it's actually largely within peripheral townships within Gauteng. These are low-income neighborhoods formally developed, but this is an informal, spontaneous form of kind of infill development within existing townships. Informal, both of this is informal, and informal development is growing more quickly than formal development in South Africa. That's a really important point that planners, I don't think, have fully understood or embraced as yet. So this is a very important agenda, not just for Africa as a whole, but also for South Africa. How do we deal with informality to make it more functional and more effective in all sorts of ways? I want to show some images of what's been happening in Cape Town in the last few years. This shows a graph for the growth in land invasions. These are unauthorized invasions of occupations of public and private land. This is an illustration of extensive growth on the ground. People, because of crowding and some other reasons I'll explain, are basically taking the law unto themselves and just settling on other people's land. It spiked in 2018, and some more recent data I've got, I haven't been able to produce a graph of it yet, shows it spiked again this year in 2020. And it's partly linked with the pandemic and the economic effects. People can't afford to pay rent where they live and are basically occupying land to avoid paying rent for their shelter and accommodation. These are some illustrations of the kind of thing that's been going on in the last couple of years. People occupying, this is a wetland area on the periphery of the city, people occupying that land very, very quickly. You can see how this area suddenly becomes settled with shacks, basically. Some other images of the same area where people are basically occupying any leftover land under power lines or along drainage channels to find somewhere cheap, somewhere free to live. It happens very, very quickly. This is another wetland, also showing on the right what happens in the winter when it rains. These areas are very vulnerable to flooding. So the planners are very, very worried about what's going on. This is an area of biodiversity on the periphery of the city. Within the space of a few months, this was in 2018, within the space of a few months, this whole area, very extensive area, was settled by people putting shacks, and then over time, those shacks densifying. This was an area of private property, not far from the airport, within the space, literally of a few weeks, an estimated 7,000 structures in green on the bottom right were erected on this. This is a much more organized occupation of this site. This was a sports field earmarked for a school. Within a few months was occupied and no longer available for that. This was a site, planned site for a new school in the city that within a few weeks and months was occupied by informal housing. This was a private land, actually earmarked for an industrial area. Again, within a few months was occupied. The city's strategy to deal with this, in essence, has been about control, trying to enforce the law and trying to prevent this happening. And it hasn't been very successful. It's caused a lot of conflict. The city has been able to prevent some invasions and some occupations, but at the price of enormous conflict and enormous chaos and disruption. You could just see some images of this, overt conflict, physical destruction of property, and inflaming tensions with the community. A really vicious cycle. And this, I think, is a key point. If we're not careful about informal development, we end up in a vicious circle of mutually destructive development and mistrust of government and suspicion all round, creating a dangerous breeding ground for the kind of thing, some of the conflicts we heard about in the Middle East and rural Nigeria, if one isn't careful about how the situation is handled. The other form of growth is intensive growth in backyards. So this is an illustration of how an area was laid out in 2000 for small public housing delivered by the government for individuals. Within 8-9 years, this was occupied and densified by backyard structures, mostly shacks, massive intensification of that development. An indication that planners really haven't got much of a clue as to the huge demand for land, the huge demand for people to live in these places. This is a place in Cape Town, laid out as a settlement in 1998. You could see the individual houses built there, RDP housing. Within 20 years, the density had increased by 7 times the original population, the planned density. You can imagine impact on infrastructure. You can imagine the impact on open space, on open ground, the impact on schools and other facilities in that area of a 7-fold increase in population. This is another area, a formal settlement laid out here. Within a decade or so, massive growth of the local population around particularly informal types of development. These just to illustrate the kinds of shacks that you create a kind of shack compound. That's your original house in the middle, and then people build shacks to get an income and to provide accommodation for relatives or for other people that they rent out. In the extreme, you get this kind of urban landscape, double-story shacks, very much crowded together, quite an inhospitable living environment, because of the sheer pressure of people wanting to live in these places. So the informal development clearly has important limitations. To summarize very briefly, makeshift structures, these shacks, indicate very little investment in buildings and very little organization of how that process is organized, of how that process is conducted. And that's a major problem because these are very flimsy. They can burn down and they can cause serious health hazards internally. There's little or no infrastructure or public services in these places, and there is a haphazard arrangement of the individual structures. They're crowded together in an unsafe way. So that's poses all sorts of health and safety risks of the structures burning down, of crowding together, of disease, and of flooding in the low-lying areas. Typically, there are 3 responses to enforce the law, and I've shown some examples of how that's attempted to stop people occupying land, etc. Benign neglect is another, perhaps the most important response. As long as these structures are not burning down, as long as the people are not causing conflict, government tends to leave these places alone on the grounds that if it's justified, let's at least not do any harm. But this is not a progressive, this is not a developmental response. And this is actually creating problems for the future. We have to pursue this third approach. We have to engage in a much more positive way to try and enable progressive improvement and regularization. This is no way to build a city through informal, spontaneous development because of these limitations on the left. It just is not a way to build a functional, productive city or an inclusive city if we just allow it to happen without really engaging with it. And that's, I think, really a key message that I'm trying to convey. And just to illustrate why that is such a challenge, this is a map of Cape Town showing the coincidence, right? The areas, the densest areas, the informal areas around the southeast quadrant of the city. the Cape Flats, are also the areas which have been most vulnerable to the pandemic. These are the areas of highest infection. These are the areas of also lowest income. This is a map showing the income distribution, the numbers, the people in the bottom income bracket, predominantly in this. The affluent suburbs to the north and to the west of the city have been largely free of the disease and are basically unaffected. So, we can't just have this knee-jerk de-densification response. We've got to get to the root causes of the problems, which are largely economic. And I want to illustrate just for a few minutes some hard evidence about the uneven impact of the pandemic in our different types of settlement within cities. Because this has been a big national study that a colleague of mine, Justin Visaki, and I have been working on to try and unpack the impact in different parts of our cities. We distinguish between suburbs, townships, peripheral urban areas, and shack dwellers. That includes both types of informal development I mentioned, the informal settlements and the backyard shacks. And it tries to compare. And very briefly, what does this research show? The first and perhaps most important finding is that hunger has become a much bigger issue in our cities than it was even a year ago. In the shack, among shack dwellers, 1 in 3 went hungry. 1 in 3 households went hungry in May, June this year. If you looked at comparative evidence available before the pandemic, you would find levels of hunger below 15%, below 10% in most parts of the city. So this is a dramatic increase. Fortunately, it has come down a bit since May, June. So in July or August, it was down to about a 1 in 4 shack dwellers. It's higher than elsewhere, higher than in the townships, the peri-urban areas, and much higher than in the suburbs. But it's a massive issue now because hunger is a massive source of anger and frustration. You can't sustain hunger. It damages human development, malnutrition. It stunts children's development and children's growth. So it's a really, really important issue that I think we're not taking seriously enough. And it's exposed this enormous disparity within our city. Why did people go hungry? Because they ran out of money to buy food, quite simply. This shows the proportions of people, respondents, who said they ran out of money. 60%, no less, of households in the informal areas ran out of money in April this year. And it had come down a bit to 50%. It's still very, very high and much higher than other parts of our city. And why did people run out of money to buy food? Because they lost their jobs and their livelihoods. This graph shows the impact on unemployment in the 4 different types of area. Comparing as a baseline 2017, the latest date for which we have comparable information. And you can see the unemployment rates here between around 10% in the suburbs, the green line, to 20, 22, 23% in the poorer areas of the city, of each city. And you can see how unemployment more than doubled. The yellow line is the shack dwellers. It went from about 22% to about nearly 50% in April 2020, more than double. It's come down a little bit since then. And what happened was that the lockdown imposed by the government stopped informal traders from going out and selling things. It was a very, very blunt control restriction imposed, and it caused all sorts of problems, which fortunately were relaxed within a few weeks when government realized the damage that was being done. Nevertheless, we see this long-lasting impact, this widening of the gap in terms of unemployment between our different parts of our cities. And that problem is going to be last into the future because the recovery is proving to be very slow. Fortunately, there was some compensation for this loss of income. The government passed a special grant, about $30 a month, so very modest in its scale. But you could see that the poorer parts of our cities, the townships, shack areas, and peri-urban areas benefited, roughly 1 in 4, 1 in 3, down to less than 1 in 5 shack dwellers benefited from this special grant aimed at unemployed people, really. This is a puzzle and clearly a concern that shack dwellers, despite being poorer actually than other other parts of the city, were less likely to benefit from the grant. Nevertheless, it was helpful, it was beneficial, but still a minority of people benefited from this grant. So what does this evidence tell us about what's happened in the last few months? COVID-19 has clearly hit the poorest communities hardest, through unemployment, through lower incomes, and through more hunger. The grants that government has given have partially offset the effects, but only partially, of job loss. Shack dwellers have lost out from their fair share. And there is some evidence that the land invasions I talked about before are partly prompted by people who are desperate now, can't afford to pay the rent, and are basically going out and occupying land where they can live without paying a price. The relief from government has been partial and it's temporary. These grants are due to be removed in January. The economic recovery is proving to be slow and it risks further restrictions on, at the moment, we risk further restrictions because the number of infections is rising and there are hints from various politicians that the country could go into another lockdown of some kind, not the stringent lockdown that was first introduced, but some kind of restrictions may be introduced to try and prevent a second wave of any scale. This is clearly inadequate, and I think the key point I'm trying to get across this afternoon is that we need a stronger localized response to these kinds of problems. A place-based response. One of the other speakers talked about place-based planning. That's really important, that we don't apply uniform restrictions or uniform solutions. The welfare solution is important, but not enough on its own. That we develop bottom-up initiatives, we upgrade communities, we encourage local enterprise, we build partnerships across communities and build capacity at the local level and to improve accountability, because there is a kind of virtuous circle here. Through strengthening local stakeholders, we help to hold government to account as well as help to solve problems. This requires an enabling state, not issuing tenders to external contractors. So one of the features of the response to the early response to the crisis in informal settlements was the government basically commissioned external contractors to provide water tanks, to provide sanitizer, to provide indeed a temporary accommodation for the de-densification plan. It didn't work with communities to try to enable people to help solve problems together. So let me elaborate this in my last 5 minutes or so. Let me try to elaborate a little bit more these principles of an enabling state of planning that is working with communities rather than doing things to community. Action-oriented planning. I think a key point is to try to release well-located land. Land is a massive, massive issue. It's a scarce resource in our cities, the ultimate scarce resource in our cities. So we have to use it more effectively. We've got to release land that's locked up. And actually, a lot of land in South African cities is owned by the public sector. The public sector does not have its act together to release this land for settlement development. We need to streamline regulatory procedures. We heard something about the colonial planning system in Nigeria. We also have regulatory systems that were designed for a different context. We need simplified regulatory procedures, which at the moment create enormous bureaucracy and blockages to rapid response to situation on the ground. We need ways of capturing the uplift in land values. That's another weakness of informality, that basically people don't pay any rates or taxes. So government doesn't have revenue to reinvest in infrastructure. If we can create a virtuous cycle of progressive improvement, we can recover some of the value that's created from functional settlements to reinvest in public services and infrastructure. That requires partnerships with the private sector, with non-government organizations, with community organizations to mobilize resources and to mobilize expertise, building together, working together to develop this agenda of better, building back better. So let me expand a bit further with some other thoughts. I want to compare in this slide kind of pure population density, which is really informal settlements, where enormous crowding creates these risks. Concentrated poverty has other effects. South Africa's informal settlements have terrible levels of crime, for example, gender-based violence, because of the sheer stress and strain of poor people crowded together. We've got to convert this form of crowding into functional density, and I call that economic density, because I think this gives us a kind of vision of the kinds of settlements we want to create, where there is more investment in tangible structures, in proper buildings, investment in infrastructure to create more livable environments without such a risk of disease, where there are opportunities from that investment to participate in building, developing skills, creating employment, encouraging local enterprise. This is a vital part of this agenda to address livelihoods and address the income problem in our informal settlements. A more conducive physical environment will also attract further public and private investment. Part of the danger at the moment is that these places are seen as no-go areas, where there's high crime, where there are no rules and regulations. And the private sector is simply these places are too risky for private sector investment. There is huge demand for better housing, for better living environments. We need to find a way of working together to create these more positive functional places. And this is a sort of attempt to outline this virtuous circle of positive feedback, an incremental process, a slow process, but putting in place a positive cycle that will generate better places, improve public facilities, more jobs and higher incomes. It does require the communities to be better organized. And I think that's a really important message. Poor communities are often conflict-ridden. There's a competition for scarce resources. People are battling to survive. We've got to try and stabilize and strengthen community organization so they speak with one voice. Improve stability, build partnerships with other stakeholders, reconfigure the layout of haphazard settlements, improve and invest in public infrastructure, create better shelter, better accommodation, and through that process, increase livelihoods as well as livability. So my final slide, sorry, two more, second last slide, is this comes from work that my colleague has also been heavily involved with an NGO in an informal settlement in Durban, Ethekwini. So this is the informal settlement as it was and largely still is. What the NGO is doing is working with the community and the municipality to create a better layout. And this is a sort of vision of the kind of improved accommodation that's being planned. This is an example of the individual units that are actually under construction as we speak. It's turning single-story shacks into multi-story, 2 or 3 story dwellings where people have more space, more living space. Local labor is being used to construct these places. This is giving people skills. It's also freeing up space. You can see how crowded this settlement is. It's a microcosm of other informal settlements. This frees up space at ground floor level for access roads, for infrastructure, for public space, for children's play areas, for indeed economic activity, marketplaces, and some other economic activity. So it frees up space by building upwards and not just outwards. Intensive upwards development is a very big part of this economic density agenda. So my final slide, we have to de-risk urban density with a positive vision of economic density through investment and through community organization, and indeed organization of government and stakeholders. I liked Valeria's talk about governance and coordination. That's very much part of what I'm also talking about. Not forced distancing, not the dispersal of settlements. Economic density is a bigger problem than high population density. We must invest in floor space by building upwards. We must improve essential infrastructure, strengthen the organization of communities, not force compliance with a sort of tough security approach. Through this process, we create jobs, skills, livelihoods, and encourage enterprise. This will improve resilience to public health problems and promote development through tangible investment and development. And that's another example at the bottom of the slide of where this is happening in some of our settlements with some support from municipality to create more functional, decent accommodation in better neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Ivan. That was really interesting and fascinating to see how things could be and what we actually need to do. We have got one question so far. There's a compliment. And the question is, what are the best practices in Africa for this kind of positive engagement that you're talking about? You did show us two, but do you have any others? I know you did mention one or two in your last slides, but you could probably expand on that.
Yes. So the best practice basically starts with an acceptance that informal settlements are here to stay. I think too often governments kind of think that let's hope that they go away somehow. Either they will become formal somehow, magically become formal, as the economy grows, a kind of trickle-down effect. Somehow these will become informal, or well, there's no. It's kind of benign neglect. You know, we don't know how to handle these places. So acceptance of these places are here to stay, I think, is a critical first point. The second message coming out of experience is that there has to be a proper engagement with communities. It's critically important. Government has to sit down with key stakeholders in these communities to address problems. The challenges are formidable, and therefore it's not realistic to have a shopping list approach, a comprehensive approach. It's really a question of trying to prioritize with communities what are the top 3 issues that we can address within a realistic timescale, right? And then systematically working through those issues, building confidence, building trust through this incremental process to bring people together to show that positive improvements are possible, and then moving on to other issues. I think that incremental progressive approach is a really important message that comes out of experience. South Africa has got an informal settlement upgrading program that I should just briefly mention. It's struggled to get traction, partly because of the first challenge I mentioned. You know, there is still this resistance from key leaders and decision makers to engaging with informality. There's somehow a persistent challenge there that, you know, these are problem areas and these people have occupied this land illegally, right? And therefore we shouldn't engage with them because we are going to incentivize, at worst, incentivize illegal land invasion. So we have to overcome that mindset blockage and start engaging constructively. Some settlements are in dangerous locations. I think that I should also say that. And so we have to think about and plan for relocation, where people are really living in a dangerous wetland that is going to flood every other year. It doesn't make sense to formalize that development in that area. And so some relocation is important. Anyway, those are some clues. I can elaborate a bit further, but I don't want to go on and on. I want to hear some more questions.
Okay. I'd like to pose a question to you, or in fact, 2 questions. The one is, we know that the informal settlements are here. and there are people who've been on the waiting list for 25 years. How come we haven't been able to deliver housing? Is it the inadequacy of local government, or is it a more systematic kind of problem? That is the one. And then the other one, if we accept that we are going to have informal settlements and we are going to have massive urbanization, would it be a sensible idea to proactively make land available within particularly our largest cities in the metropolitan regions where we have the fastest growth? It may not be politically acceptable, but from a planning perspective, you think that could work?
Excellent questions. Thanks very much, Verna. So you mentioned this challenge we face in South Africa of very long waiting lists for housing. There is now, some people talk about it as a culture of expectation. There has been, because actually this dates back to 1994 when we became a democracy. The number one promise of government, actually, the new government in 94, was to give everybody a free house. Housing was a critical part of the political settlement. That reflected the previous government's denial of housing for the Black population. So the government took upon themselves to make this promise that basically all poor people would be given a free house. And of course, that has proved to be an impossibility to deliver. The cost has increased over time. The numbers have increased because the population is growing, urbanization is growing. And so it's been not a sensible response to the housing problem to promise everyone a free house. It's created this also an expectation, a mindset that government will deliver. And I try to address that view that government cannot, it's a sort of welfare response. Government cannot solve all the problems of society in a top-down paternalistic way. We have to get out of that mindset of welfare and social development as the answer. We have to have more of a bottom-up, a more realistic approach to dealing with our problems. So we need to move away from this simple RDP housing program to a much more diversified response, including upgrading informal settlements and including what you're saying about making land available proactively. So part of the reason we see these land invasions in cities at the moment is that the government has not been making land available for people to settle. So we can do that, and we can do more than just provide the land. What we need to do is to provide land with some of the basic services in place, right? The basic infrastructure, the sanitation, the water, electricity connections. We need, and probably also some kind of wet stand on the site that people get with some sort of ablution facility. And through creating the infrastructure and the layout, the sites, we will create better settlements than informal land occupation. They will have this infrastructure. We'll be creating the asset, actually, an asset with security for people to invest in their own housing, their own structures. And that will encourage an incremental upgrading process. There's experience in other parts of the world of where this has been achieved quite successfully. We've been slow to learn from those lessons because of this obsession with giving everybody a free house. But it does require government to take this initial step of identifying land and preparing it in advance, and then distributing it to eligible households. And some of the cities are now talking about this, a rapid land release program. Government itself is talking about this. It's all rather below the radar screens because there's still this political challenge. How do you change expectations? And the government has been promising everyone a free house. Suddenly changing that, we're going to give you a service site instead of a free house, is a different kind of offer. And the politicians haven't got the courage, putting it simply, the courage to acknowledge that openly and explicitly.
Thank you very much. I agree a lot of what you've said, close to my own heart. I have another question here. Could you say something about the COVID-19 pandemic in the rural area of South Africa Is it better there? Should we have decentralization or discourage urbanization for better use of space?
Good. Okay. So the pandemic has had its biggest effect in the cities. The highest number of infections, the highest proportion of the population get infected, but they haven't been immune. Rural areas have not avoided the problem because there has been, despite lockdowns and restrictions on movement, there has been movement and it has spread. And in fact, there are a number of really prominent health experts that say the lockdown has been a disaster, just in terms of the restricting the spread of the disease. So it has spread throughout the country. At one time, South Africa had the 5th highest number of infections in the whole world, right? Despite having one of the most stringent lockdowns in the whole world. So it hasn't worked, partly because there were all sorts of exceptions to the restrictions, like people attending funerals in rural areas, and like taxis. People were allowed to travel for much of the time, fully occupied, fully 100% capacity in minibus taxi. So it spread throughout the country, and indeed now it's growing more rapidly in some of the rural areas where it was slower to spread at the outset. But the response is not. I disagree with sort of the thrust of the question that perhaps de-densifying and discouraging people moving to the cities will help the disease. As I've tried to emphasize, urban density is a really positive force for social and economic development. And we need to work with it. We need to manage that urban density, not allow spontaneous crowding. And through that process, we will address the public health risks by managing it better, providing people with infrastructure, water, sanitation services, open space between shacks, and we will address the social and economic development challenges by managing urban density better, not by trying to pretend we can turn back history and we'll go back to the countryside. That's not going to help us in any way.
Yeah, there's one last question, which is about African cities that are urbanizing, but they haven't industrialized. Would you like to comment on this conundrum?
That's, again, a really important issue. We've seen, I think somebody used the term, it was Tybert Lawinson used the term urbanization of poverty in much of Africa. And you do see this in the hard evidence that basically, unlike in many other parts of the world, urbanization in many countries has not coincided with either industrialization or economic development more generally. So that's a massive challenge. How do we get this progressive developmental power of urbanization that I believe in, the power of urban density? How do we convert that into real economic improvements, right? My difficulty with the sort of industrialization as the response is that it's separated from urbanization. We have to try and find a way of combining urbanization with economic development and not a sort of in separate industrial policy. South Africa, we separate industrial policy, industrialization discussions from spatial discussions about development and urbanization. We've got to try and find a way of combining the two. And that's why I talk about this incremental process of managing urban development better, of thinking about economic density that combines economic prosperity, economic development with physical improvement and urban and better managed urban areas. So much of what I was talking about was kind of incremental improvement in skills and livelihoods as a result of building better. Through that process, you can also create space for industry to develop. The supply of building materials is an obvious example, right, for building better houses. Bricks and mortar and concrete, cement, steel, corrugated iron, furniture and finishings, roofing material. That's an obvious connection to my agenda. You create businesses that build, that make construction materials, right? Similarly, the infrastructure within urban areas. You create industry to manufacture building materials and ready. From that, you diversify into other areas, cognate areas, all kinds of services that go along with the kind of urbanization I was talking about, from real estate services, rental agents, to professional advice, surveyors, accountants, quantity surveyors, these kind of planners, town planners. There are all these kinds of professional skills which can also develop. There's the whole community development skill set, which is another one that's really important, working with stakeholders, helping to build capabilities within communities, NGOs. There's all that jobs in these sectors too that could create employment and livelihoods. So I think I'm talking about sort of incremental, realistic process of building economies from the bottom up, alongside other kinds of economic development policies, special economic zones, industrial policies. These things are also not incompatible with what I'm saying. I haven't emphasized them in my talk this afternoon, but they're very consistent.
Thank you very much. I think we're reaching the end of our time this afternoon, and I'd really like to thank you, Prof. Ivan, for a very insightful talk. I've learned something. We've had a very interesting discussion in terms of the questions that have been asked. And I thank you, everybody who's been with us. We hope you've enjoyed the program, and we hope to see you again soon. And I'd like to now hand you over back to Katerina.
Thank you very much, Verna, and thank you, Ivan, for this really insightful talk. I'd like to extend my thank yous to all our speakers and chairs for the past 3 hours. Those were really insightful, and we've learned that the MENA region is still very much in a post-conflict state, with efforts still going on for rehabilitation and rebuilding. From our panel in Nigeria, we heard that security and regional planning are very much intertwined with each other, and also a prerequisite for one another. And thank you, Ivan, for presenting the urgency of addressing urbanization, also in the context of the still ongoing pandemic in different parts of the world. We could not have organized these sessions without the help of our local partners, and I'd like to thank them in particular for their help. In particular, I'd like to thank Abeer, Elshater, Yehya Serag, Lokman Oshodi, Oladayo Ibrahim Ramon, and Ivan Turek. Thank you very much, but also thank you to you, our attendees, for contributing to the discussions in the past sessions and for attending the webinar today. Our RSA Global journey is far from over yet. We have more programs coming up, and this Friday, on the 13th of November, we will be in Latin America. This will include a plenary by Michael Stolper on urbanization, a panel on local economic development in different parts of Latin America, and a session on academic writing and publishing. All sessions are again free to attend, and you can register for them on our website, so please do check our website. RSA Global will then conclude with our last stopover in North America on Monday, the 16th of November, and a plenary and panel will highlight the topic of migration, and a third session will provide insights on how to communicate your research for policymakers. Again, we hope you can join us, and I'd like to also take the opportunity to thank my colleagues in the RSA, working hard in the background and without whom this series would not have been possible. So thank you very much, Alex Holmes, Daniela Karl, and Lisa Reynolds for all your support. We hope to see you soon at another webinar, and until then, I hope you stay safe. Thank you for being here today, and goodbye.